Former Assistant Secretary of State for George W. Bush, Robert Charles. And Robert, we're again joining you as we look at images from moments ago. President Biden meeting Benjamin Netanyahu and the entire Israeli delegation. And look, it cannot be overstated the fact that two great allies are meeting in a time of war. It is a sign to the rest of the world that we are united. But nevertheless, Robert, should Joe Biden still have made this trip following the cancellation of the Jordan stop?
You know, honestly, Todd, diplomacy under these circumstances historically and today is hard, and I'm glad the president is there. The number one message I think he should be delivering beyond unity is that this should not escalate, and escalation is the great fear right now. And you've got an awful lot of innocents in this region who don't want to see war escalate. You have three groups in the last 24 hours that have launched rockets into Israel. One of them is Islamic Jihad, as just mentioned. Another is the militant arm of Hamas, as just mentioned, and also Fatah. They've all launched rockets on Israel, and Hezbollah is in the wings. But if you step back 20 paces, what you're really watching here is the opening of a second major proxy war. This one is against Iran, which has funded all three of those groups, and frankly also Hezbollah. And the second, of course, is what we've got going in Ukraine. So we're really in a two-front war right now. And I honestly, although I cannot imagine past leaders of the region, including President Abdullah, canceling on any other president, I think the president has to do what the president has to do. And when you put Air Force One down on David Ben Gurion Airport and you have him get out and give a hug to Netanyahu, you're saying, look, I'm here. This conflict is one that I'm focused upon. I will tell you, again, I think a lot of this, I hate to do Monday morning quarterbacking, but just like Afghanistan, just like the invitation to an incursion in Ukraine, this was an avoidable conflict. Terrorist groups are always out there. But when you greenlight Iran by imagining that they're a real player in some way that would contribute to peace, I think you've misconceived the entire environment. They basically gave up on the Abrahamic Accords that had been started by President Trump. And ultimately, if those accords had gone forward, you might have finally seen a sit-down and some discussion of peace with the Palestinians. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were in a better place than we are now. And I'm afraid that we're really on the cusp, as you both have said, as all of your reporting has said, we're on the cusp of an escalation. And if there's any message to be delivered by the president, it should be, I'm calling on this entire region not to escalate this. Terrorism is wrong, peace is worth fighting for, and innocent lives can be saved if we don't escalate.
Yeah, and that is the frightening part about all of this, the uncertainty for what could possibly come. And it isn't just Israel and the surrounding areas, Robert. Reuters is reporting that the U.S. military thwarted a drone attack that was attempting to target al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, which hosts American troops. And then these images out of Lebanon overnight, these mass protests that took place there in the U.S. Embassy compound in Beirut. There was a large fire there. Also, there were major protests surrounding the French embassy as well. So this is Lebanon. This is the country to the north of Israel. And there is really a lot of concern that this could go from a one-front war to a two-front war. And now with this hospital bombing that took place, tensions are even higher. So what does that mean for the future of this conflict?
I think, again, just to go back to the heart of the matter, obviously peace between the Palestinians, the innocent Palestinians in Gaza, and frankly, the Israeli government has been put on hold for an indefinite period, probably for years. But the real message is to tell Iran, don't you think about it? Because if Iran gets into this, and we've got two carrier battle groups in that region right now, as you know, part of my past life was Navy intelligence, Iran needs to take a step back. Iran has obviously got big components in Iraq. They've got components in Syria. They've got components all over the region and, frankly, all over the world. And I think Biden's message, part of the don't escalate message, is a direct statement to Iran to back off, sit down, and don't continue to push terrorism in this region. Sadly, his credibility isn't much because he's the one that opened the door to $6 billion being sent to Iran, and buying hostages. Once you green light terrorism, it's hard to turn it off. And I see this as a trip, rushing to the corral to shut the gates after the horses are gone. But there are horses still in there, and the horses are the de-escalation issue. So I think a direct message to Iran saying, sit down and do not escalate this, and to other Arab leaders in the region saying, we want peace in this region. We do not want more conflict in this region. And while we stand with Israel on the foundation that ultimately at some point these nations can get together and begin to resume peace. But that right now is off in the future, because at this moment you've got too many people dying in Israel and, frankly, unfortunately, also in Gaza. And my greatest fear is that innocents all over the region will die at a time when, if we can just saner heads can prevail, maybe we can prevent that from happening.
Robert, you said at the top that diplomacy under these circumstances is hard, and that is obvious in the current situation that we face. But in light of the fact that that U.S. Embassy fire in the general compound area is burning, as a former Assistant Secretary of State, should we evacuate all embassy personnel, not just in Lebanon, but throughout the region?
Well, I think we have to take lessons from the past. We do know what has happened at the Egyptian embassy. We know what happened at Benghazi. If there are security requests by these consulates and by these embassies, they need to be immediately honored. I don't think there's any postponing the reality of security threats. But on the other hand, the United States, and I give, I was not a Foreign Service officer. I was a Naval Intelligence officer and an Assistant Secretary of State. I tip my hat to the Foreign Service personnel all over the world today, because, quite frankly, they are in harm's way just as much, very often, as those in direct combat in a war zone. And now, as the region becomes more of a war zone, I think we really do have to also stand our ground. So it's always a balancing act, Todd. It's an embassy by embassy, consulate by consulate decision. But I also think that part of that happens at the top end, where you do finally get sit-down meetings with the leaders who can help calm the situation with you. A unified front pushing toward de-escalation would be useful in this moment, and recognizing the difference between terrorist groups, and the three that I mentioned, plus Hezbollah, who are all underwritten by Iran, and the innocents. And there are a lot of innocent Palestinians, too. And it's the greatest sadness of war, whether you're talking World War II or this conflict, is that civilians who would never want to go to war, who just want a secure life, often pay the ultimate price.
Robert, we can also broaden this conflict out to other parts of the world. A senior Hamas official recently said that Russia is sympathetic to Hamas and likes this war because it complicates U.S. aid for Ukraine. And that comment is important because Putin is now in China, hoping to strengthen his relationship with Xi Jinping. So Putin supports this Iranian-backed invasion and then goes to China. All of these bad actors are in lockstep with each other, which really raises the stakes here.
It does, although you make a very important point, and that is that these bad actors are bad actors who are basically collegially working against the interests of Western values. Putin and Xi have issued a statement within the last 24 hours, essentially throwing up their idea of an alternative order, which is essentially a communist autocratic order, very well aligned with another totalitarian regime, Iran. And so I think, on the one hand, it's horrifying because when there's an opening, when there's a war zone, when there's a distraction, others take action in that void or in that vacuum. And I could easily see China taking action, and maybe not even the action we expect. They might take action against another ally, something to do with a Japanese island or the Philippines, or maybe they'd take the Sakhalin Islands, or maybe they'd test Western will by taking some other protectorate or ally. Piece of an ally. And I think we just have to be aware, and this is where weakness and appeasement always invite bad actors to the table. And strength, or peace through strength, or deterrence always does the reverse. And I'm a big fan of Ronald Reagan, worked for Ronald Reagan, believe that peace through strength is a very real, very operational, as well as strategic approach to keeping the world safe. Unfortunately, again, we're in an environment now where we've got a lot of fire afoot. And what we need to do is start putting that fire out and recognizing that these bad actors are working together against the interests of the West, against liberty and freedom and all the things that we as Americans stand for. I also think Americans should unify not just around Israel and around the innocents that have died in Israel and in Gaza, but around the idea that we as America are a beacon. We represent, as that hug represents there, we represent the idea that we want a safe, stable, peaceful, liberty-centered world. And that is the world order that sits opposite the order that's being pushed right now by Iran, China, and Russia.
Bobby, the 1930s are happening right before our eyes. It's incumbent upon our world leaders to make sure the 1940s don't follow suit. Robert Charles, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time and your insight this morning.